That being said, let's move over to wide receivers and talk about some of those guys that we want to hit on. First, for me, it's going to be Ladd McConkey going up against the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, this is one of the best matchups you can ask for. But McConkey, rookie season, seeing a really healthy 24% target share, averaging roughly 6 targets per game. Right now, he's playing about 63% of the snaps from the slot. He's averaging 13 PPR points per game. Efficiency-wise, he checks all the boxes. 21st in yards per out run, 16th in yards after the catch, and 15th in yards per team pass attempt right now. McConkey has seen a target share of 32% against man coverage. It has a 41% win rate against man coverage this year, which is top 12 among all wide receivers. And that's going to be critical. What we're about to talk about next, because the Ravens have allowed the third most fantasy points to the slot. So that is one check mark for Ladd McConkey. The Ravens play man coverage around 35% of the time, which is a top 10 in the league. And McConkey has been the man beater for this offense this year. He's averaging 0.81 fantasy points per route run against man coverage, where Quentin Johnston has been actually the zone beater. And the Ravens play, in terms of zone, they play cover 3 at the highest rate. And Quentin Johnston has absolutely torched cover 3 this year, averaging 7.8 fantasy points per route run. McConkey is a locked-in wide receiver 2 for me this week, where Quentin Johnston is actually a pretty solid wide receiver 3 play. This game could be absolute bonanza, kind of like what we saw against the Bengals the week prior. We know the Ravens secondary is terrible. I think this is a great matchup. And honestly, we've seen a lot of really development here over the last month of the season with Justin Herbert really starting to throw the ball a lot more. They're starting to put in more concepts for him, to like what Lamar Jackson would do. I mean, it's been awesome to see with Justin Herbert, who nobody wanted Justin Herbert. Like Justin Herbert, that either wasn't went undrafted or has been dropped. And for the last month, like he has been a top 10 quarterback because of his rushing upside, because of what he's done there. So I really like this spot for all their pass catchers. I think Will Dissly is also a really good play this week, but mainly it's going to be Ladd McConkey. It's going to be Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Quentin Johnston because I was for sure guilty of this. But it's good to see him rebound off of the year that he had last year. You want to talk about somebody that was completely unwanted. Look no further than Quentin Johnston, but he's quietly been pretty consistent too. He's been a wide receiver 3 in 5 of his 8 games, which, using the bar of wide receiver 3 isn't that high of a threshold. But considering with how people were talking about him last year, if I would have told you at the end of the year last year, like, hey, out of Quentin Johnston's 8 games that he plays next year, he's going to be a wide receiver 3 or better in 5 of them, there's zero chance you would have believed me. So I'm just happy to see him play well after he was literally left for dead following his rookie year. But going to move on to my first play at wide receiver for week 12. That is going to be Jauan Jennings, who's just been on a tear since the 49ers came back off of their bye week. Jennings has racked up 22 targets the past 2 weeks, has at least 7 catches for 90 yards in both of those games. In the last 2 weeks, Jennings is second among all wide receivers in target share and first read percentage. The Packers have allowed the 11th fewest fantasy points per game to wideouts, but it seems like they could be without Jair Alexander entirely, or even if he does play, could be limited snaps after he was not able to make it through the first half with a knee injury this past week. I still like this play regardless of what happens with George Kittle as well, who missed last week with a hamstring injury. So I think you feel pretty good about plugging Jennings back into your lineup for week 12.
Yeah, he is a phenomenal play. Jennings has ran nearly 50% of his routes from the slot this season, which sets up really nicely against the Packers. They've allowed the 14th most PPR points to the slot wide receiver this season. I really like that call for Jauan Jennings. I mean, he's just been a monster. 4th in yards per out run, 9th in yards per team pass attempt, like checks every single box. And he has been so good this year. And he's definitely been their number 1 wide receiver. We kind of keep waiting for Deebo Samuel. People keep talking about him. It was like, oh, he's a buy. But it just had, I mean, he's had some unlucky, stuff happen to him. I remember he had like a 70-yard touchdown call back penalty. And my goodness, I feel like this year we've had so many like big plays get called back by penalty. I know on Monday night we had the Nico Collins first play of the game, 77-yard touchdown, got called back by a illegal man downfield. It's just, I don't know. I feel like that's happened like multiple games this year where it's just been one after another. It's just been crazy. But anyways, Jauan Jennings, absolutely love that call, though. My next guy is going to be Calvin Ridley. Since D-Hop was traded, Ridley has been peppered with targets. He's receiving an elite 33% target share. His 39% first read target share ranks 3rd among all wide receivers. That trails only Malik Neighbors and the aforementioned Jauan Jennings. and he leads the league with a 51% air yard share and is averaging nearly 15 yards per reception. He's averaging 17.6 PPR points per game. He gets a really good matchup against the Texans, who allow the 12th most fantasy points to outside wide receivers this year. Over the last 6 games, the Texans have yielded the 12th highest yards per reception and the 6th most receiving yards and touchdowns to wide receivers. Ridley makes for a really high-end wide receiver 2 this week. And also a little sneaky play, at least in terms of the coverage that the Texans play the most. Nick Westbrook-Akine actually averages almost 1 fantasy point per route run in this matchup as well. So, like, the dude's just been like Will Fuller-esque, like scoring touchdowns. Like, he just doesn't stop scoring touchdowns. He's scored like a massive amount of touchdowns this year. But I do think that like he's at least a decent option this week as like a, if you're really hurting a ton of players on bye this week, you could look there. But either way, Calvin Ridley has been a dog since getting this opportunity. So really do like Calvin Ridley in this matchup this week.
Yeah, it never feels particularly good leaning on Will Levis to get you there. But like you said, with the amount of targets that he's seeing, he only has to hit on a couple of those. Speaking of someone who only needs to hit on a couple of those, I'm going to talk about Jameson Williams next. He's always someone who's going to be a little bit more boom bust, but this is a spot where I think the boom is a little bit higher than the bust potential. The Colts have allowed the 8th most yards to receivers on the year, including the 7th most yards after the catch. And among wide receivers who have run at least 100 routes, Williams has the 2nd highest yards after catch per reception number at nearly 10.5. Additionally, Williams has the 9th highest average depth of target, and the Colts have allowed the 4th most completed air yards on the season. So, this is a spot where you're obviously loading up all of your Lions. Even if Sam Laporta comes back in this one, obviously missed last week with that shoulder injury, I still like Jameson Williams here. It muddies the waters a little bit, but like we were talking about with the running backs, the Lions just don't care, right? They're gonna go out there, they're gonna have their starters on the field as late as possible, even if they are up by damn near 50 points. So there's still gonna be plenty of outs for Williams to get there in week 12.
That is the best part, is that that they're just, whether they're up or not, like they're not going to go away. They're just going to keep doing what they're doing. I mean, like I said, they were still peppering Amon St. Brown with touchdowns and targets late in that game, and so great thing for fantasy purposes. For me, the next up is going to be in the same game, just on the other side of the field, is going to be Josh Downs. Downs continues to be the Colts' best wide receiver. He's seeing a 30% first read target share. He's receiving a respectable 26% target share, which ranks top 12 among all wide receivers. He also checks all the boxes when it comes to efficiency-wise. He ranks 13th in yards per route run, 21st in yards per pass attempt, and 12th in yards after the catch. And he's averaging about 15 fantasy points per game. But this week, he gets a really good matchup. The Lions are a slot funnel. They allow the 3rd most PPR points to the slot. The Lions play man coverage 47% of the time. Downs has scored 0.60 fantasy points per route run against man coverage this year, which is top 20 among all wide receivers. They also play cover 3 and cover 4 40% of the time, which is the 5th highest rate in the league. And Downs has the 4th highest fantasy points per route run against both of those coverages this year. Basically, the main part of this is going to be if Anthony Richardson can play like he did last weekend, then I do think Downs is in it for a really solid matchup again this week. I know there's some worry there because the Lions defense does get after the quarterback. They are creating a turnover on 17.3% of all their drives, which is top 3 among all defenses this year. They're not doing a great job of getting pressure. They're bottom half of the league in pressure rate this year. And so it does make you a little bit worried. Anthony Richardson, especially earlier in the season, really struggled with turnovers, but I was really surprised how well he played last week. Looked like the quarterback we were hoping to be, 270 passing yards. And so I do think Josh Downs is definitely the preferred wide receiver 1 within this offense. Alec Pierce would be a close second behind him. Pierce is more of the field stretcher, somebody they're going to sit on go routes, stuff like that. But Josh Downs just continues to be the more consistent option and probably the best wide receiver this team has on their team. And I don't say that lightly because I'm a big Michael Pittman guy, but we've seen it now for 2 years running that Josh Downs is just a better wide receiver than Michael Pittman is overall. I think he is a very, very good wide receiver, underrated in terms of what he can be. And I think next year he should be viewed as probably a top 20 wide receiver. Like, I don't think that's crazy to say. Like, we've seen it now when he's healthy. This dude's a baller.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we should have been too surprised either, because that was exactly the report we were getting this offseason during training camp. If you remember, that it was Josh Downs was looking like the best wide receiver for that Colts team. I do wonder how much the injuries are playing into it with Pittman, but there's no doubting that Josh Downs is a dog and love seeing that. He was one of my favorite wide receivers whenever he came out his rookie season. But moving on to my third play of the week at wide receiver, I'm going to go back to the well with Courtland Sutton here. The Raiders have actually somehow allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. I think some of that is schedule driven, as well as the fact that they're just getting absolutely pummeled on the ground. Las Vegas has faced guys, though, like Deshaun Watson, Justin Fields, going to hobble Justin Herbert in week 1, I think that was. They also had Stafford without Kupp or Puka in the game that they faced them. The Broncos rushing attack, I talked about really liking Javonte Williams this week, but it simply isn't like consistent enough to think that they're just going to control this through the ground like we saw them do against the Saints a couple weeks ago. But since Courtland Sutton's game against the Saints, where he saw 0 targets in week 6, he is 9th among wide receivers in target share, has nearly 35% of the team's receiving yards, which also ranks 9th, and he is tied for 10th in first read percentage over that time.
Yeah, Sutton's been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, really the last month and a half, who was starting to feel like an afterthought because really hadn't done a whole lot to start the season, has really started to turn it on. That has been a big positive. And yes, I totally agree. I mean, he gets one of the better matchups the entire weekend. So next up for me is going to be Deandre Hopkins. And I know there's probably some hesitancy coming off of whenever he had, the huge game where he scored almost 29 PPR points. And then the last couple of weeks has been a little bit down. But I will say matchups haven't been great for him the last 2 weeks. I mean, you got the Broncos with Patrick Surtain. He saw a lot of Patrick Surtain in the game. So he was only targeted 5 times. And then you had the Buffalo game where, once again, the Bills are really good against outside wide receivers. It is where they've been gotten is by on the inside in the slot. And so the Chiefs' offense just didn't really look great either in that game. But this week feels like a very big bounce back game for them. And just on paper, DeAndre Hopkins is drawing the best matchup here among all wide receivers. The Panthers run cover 3 nearly 50% of the time. And Hopkins has performed best against that coverage this year. That is the best coverage that he faces, averaging nearly 0.7 fantasy points per route run against that coverage this year. So DeAndre Hopkins is in a really good spot. I also obviously really like Travis Kelce, but I think these two are the two that I really want to focus on this week, are the two guys that I really want to play. I get it, for people that are probably a little bit hesitant because of how he's played the last 2 weeks, but this is a much better matchup for him. And honestly, they get some really good matchups moving forward. I mean, this was kind of like their last really tough game. They do get the Steelers, and then they also get the Texans, and then a couple games within the division. But the worst part of their schedule is now over, and now they have one of the more easier schedules rest of the season. So I do think DeAndre Hopkins is going to get more involved within this offense. Remember, he's only been here for a few weeks, so they're starting to get him more acclimated into the offense, and this is one of the harder offenses to learn. It is why, generally speaking, we continue to see this team bring in players that knows this team, that's been around a long time. That's why they brought back Juju Smith-Schuster when they needed a wide receiver, because he already knew the offense. So for DeAndre Hopkins, he's kind of learning on the fly, and he's only running about 60% of the routes. I do anticipate moving forward that's going to continue to climb and get more and more higher, because he is clearly the best wide receiver. I know Xavier Worthy has been there, but clearly Mahomes does not have faith in him, because Mahomes continually is throwing the ball when he is wide open, almost out of bounds. Like the game against the Bills, he had an opportunity to hit him what should have been a touchdown, and he threw it to the sideline. Obviously, Xavier Worthy should have caught the ball, but he didn't track it well enough and got out of bounds. So it was a positive for Xavier Worthy. I still think you might look at Xavier Worthy as an option this week, but I also wouldn't get caught up in thinking that what we saw last week is what they're going to do again this week, because I would not expect that either.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if that game last week is going to be like the wake-up call that the Chiefs needed. They haven't looked particularly dominant at all, and to go out and lose in that fashion, and they need to get that offense going with the playoffs coming up. So I'm with you. I really like that spot for them this week against the lowly Panthers, which, by the way, my child has decided that the Chiefs are going to be his team, which is fine. It's whatever. The only thing I told him is that Penn State was not off the table. Like that was the only choice he did not have in his sports fandom. And I was like, what? I wonder if there's some nosebleeds for that are going for a decent amount with it being the Panthers. As of right now, the cheapest ticket was $125 a pop. So he will not be going. He will not be going to his first NFL game.
That's crazy. I guess maybe it's because of the Chiefs. I guess maybe
100%.
because I'm the Panthers are terrible this year. Like, how are they not giving away tickets? But maybe because of the Chiefs, I guess. I don't know. That's crazy. Because I was actually wondering that if you were going to take them. I know you sent me some of the stuff with them and Chiefs stuff. That's a shame.
Yeah, I might try and look again on Sunday morning to see if anyone is going to give up on trying to get $125 per. Because if I was looking at next week, the Panthers have the Bucks at home, and there's tickets as low as $17 for next week. So has to just be the Chiefs, or my wife is convinced that it's because people are going to see if Taylor Swift is going to be there. So that's what she thinks anyway.
The T sizzle effect. I mean, it's
I
real.
guess, man. But moving on to my final, I don't feel comfortable calling this one of my plays of the week and really putting my name behind it. But I do think that there is a possibility that this player is ranked a little too low. And if these early rankings hold for the rest of the week, he's consensus wise right now like a back end wide receiver 3. I have him right outside of my top 24, and that is DJ Moore. Something I could not believe when I looked at it. So DJ Moore had 7 targets last week, right? Kev, do you have any idea what his average depth of target was?
I know it was a lot of screens, so my guess would have been like 3 or 4.
0.9.
Oh, I was
giving it way too much credit. I saw that. I was like, all right, there's no way. This is a glitch. So I went and checked multiple sites. So that's what it was. So unless these sites are all pulling information from the same place, 0.9 average depth of target on 7 targets just feels impossible. But this is interesting to me because we know that Minnesota is just going to blitz the absolute piss out of Caleb Williams. Thomas Brown, the interim OC, he knows this as well. So if we're going to get this type of A-dot out of DJ Moore again, just trying to get the ball out of his hands as quick as possible for Caleb Williams, Moore could easily see double digits in this one, especially if it's going to take looks away from Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. Could just be dump off city here between him and DeAndre Swift. Maybe Cole Kmet gets a little bit more involved as well. So again, not stamping this as a play of a week for me. But if you have to roll out DJ Moore because of bye weeks, injuries at the position like we were talking about, I think there's a little bit more hope here than what you might see across rankings this week, especially with the Vikings giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wideouts. But that was something I saw that I genuinely could not believe I was seeing.
Yeah, we did see some shifts overall, just the way the offense was ran last week with Shane Fraldren gone. I mean, we also saw DeAndre Swift, who was averaging, he was handling like close to 85% of the opportunities, and that completely shifted to more of a split between him and Roschon Johnson. So we'll see what else is up their sleeve here. Obviously, the offense looked better. Caleb Williams ran the ball a lot more than I think people were expecting. So it was a really close game, and they really should have won that game. Just got their hearts broken at the very end. But thankfully, as long as Shane Fraldren's gone, we're okay. So there was one player, I guess, that I wanted to mention, but I kind of went back and forth on it. But I just want to highlight really quickly is JSN. JSN has been phenomenal. And, honestly, I didn't see last week really coming because I thought with DK Metcalf coming back, he would go back to kind of being the low A-dot guy that he was. Yeah. But he was still, handled a ton of opportunities. Was targeted 11 times. Has been targeted 24 times the last 2 weeks that he's played. He is averaging almost 30 fantasy points per game the last 2 weeks. Obviously, that's not sustainable, but he's been a really reliable option. He's been a top 36 wide receiver every single week, but one since week 4. So while it hasn't necessarily been great all year, he's still the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game. They do get this matchup against the Cardinals. And the Cardinals, one area they have struggled a little bit is in the slot. They allow the 10th most PPR points to the position. And so JSN, I think, is just also in a really good spot here. I really like to see what we saw this week with DK Metcalf coming back. He actually out-targeted DK Metcalf. Metcalf saw 9 targets to 11 for JSN. So really like this emergence. And hopefully a sign of things moving forward, even not just this year, but next, because it was kind of frustrating to start the year with him because we were really hoping that, with Shane Fraldren gone, that we were going to see a much more expanded role, and they were utilizing him a lot different. It's pretty much the same similar way there to start the year, where it was all short, intermediate routes, really low A-dot. His A-dot was 74th overall at 9.3, which Actually, that feels like a mile compared to what DJ Moore saw last week. But still, overall, I still think JSN has been a really big surprise, especially down the stretch. It could end up providing to be a league winner, but this is also a good spot here at home against the Cardinals.